welcome to Champagne and Conversations. How are you?
I am good. Good to see you, Valencia.
Good to see you. I wasn't going to act like we were real familiar, but thank you for saying my name.
It's just been a while since we've seen each other.
It's been a while, but I'm so glad we were able to connect and congratulations on so many aspects. We'll get into that in just a few minutes to you. And so good to see you. I'm glad that you and your family are staying healthy and strong in the midst of all of what we have going on.
Well, thank you, and you too.
Yes. And everyone, thank you for joining us today. Champagne and Conversations. We're having a special session with Senator Jennifer McClellan. And we were running a few minutes behind because she does have some just kind of breaking news, some new legislation that just passed. And I'm excited to be able to have her to share that. So please let us know what we have here.
Well, sure. For all across the country, we've been folks have been worried about and wondering how to vote safely in person, and each state sort of decides the rules for voting for those states. So here in Virginia, we just passed a bill today that'll take effect as soon as the governor signs it to make it easier to vote in person. So we will. Fund the prepaid postage for absentee ballots, because for a lot of people, the postage could in effect be a poll tax, and we want to encourage people to vote absentee by mail. We authorized all of our local registrars to have ballot drop-off locations or drop boxes at the registrar's office at satellite voting locations before Election Day. And here in Virginia, early voting starts September 18th. And then on Election Day, they'd have to have ballot boxes at every precinct. So if you're in a vulnerable group, or you don't want to get risk of COVID, you want a caregiver or a family member to take your ballot for you, they could do that. We eliminated the requirement for a witness to sign your absentee ballot, because again, the whole point is for people who are in those high risk groups to not put them at risk of exposure to other people. And then it creates a cure process. A lot of times when you send your absentee ballot in, if for whatever reason you forget to do something, so you forget to sign it, there was no way for you to know that and to cure it. And so now if a registrar gets your ballot and sees that something is missing or something's wrong with it, they'll have to notify you in time for you to be able to fix whatever is wrong with it. So again, that bill passed today in Virginia for our elections, and I suspect if the governor hasn't already signed it, he'll probably sign it really soon.
Awesome, fantastic, yay Virginia. And for all of the other states, please just check with your local registration to be able to find out what locations would be available. And as you were stating, it should be a box somewhere near the registrar's office for them to be able to drop off those ballots. And it's just very, very necessary to make certain that you do that soon, just so that if there is some sort of discretion, if you will, then you have the opportunity to be able to fix that and not have something happen and they say we didn't receive it, all of these things that could potentially go on, and we anticipate that there will be those things, right?
Yeah, I think everybody right now, it's not too soon to make a plan to vote. So everybody, if you're not registered, get registered as soon as possible. In most states, it's October at some point is the deadline, but you can do it in September. If you think you're registered, check your registration to make sure that you're still registered. You know where to vote. You know when absentee balloting or early voting is in your state, and then make a plan to vote early and by mail if at all possible.
Yes. And with that, what are your three topics? I mean, we know that there's so much on police reform, and I hate to start the conversation with that, but I just feel like it's just been such a heavy on everyone to just figure out, what can we be asking for I guess on our side in regards to holding all of the candidates responsible at some point for what are we going to do with the police reform across the board.
Yeah, and again, you're seeing that at both the national and at state levels, that there's really been in a lot of communities a loss of faith and trust in law enforcement to keep us safe, because in a lot of places, and unfortunately it's in mostly Black and brown and low income communities, police sometimes treat everyone as if they're a suspect and not as if they're a potential witness or a victim. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And so, but part of the reason is because when we see police brutality and police misconduct, no one's held accountable. You could be a police officer who engages in excessive use of force. You could, here in Virginia, especially, you could quit your job in the middle of an investigation, move somewhere else and get hired, and nobody would know the difference. And so during our special session here, we're working on a police reform bill that would, among other things, like ban no-knock warrants. That's what happened with Breonna Taylor. She was killed when the police just burst into her home with a what we call a no-knock warrant. It would ban chokeholds. It would ban, put a duty to respond. So like with the George Floyd murder, those other officers who just stood by and watched, this bill would put a duty to intervene if you see someone doing what that officer did. It would put in place a decertification program so that if you have police departments that have a lot of excessive use of force, those departments or the police officers could be decertified. We're working on creating what we call civilian review boards, where you would have localities would have civilians who are trained to understand how everything that the police have to do, but who will investigate with subpoena power in a transparent way police misconduct, and then make recommendations that are binding for consequences. So those are just a few of the things we're doing on the police reform side. We're also doing a lot of criminal justice reform issues, because what we've seen is in a lot of places we've basically criminalized poverty. And so you'll have these, whether it's vagrancy laws, whether it's driving on a suspended license and your license is suspended for not paying court fines and fees. We have a lot of crimes that there's not an injury to anybody. We want to make sure that where there's a crime with an injury, the punishment is proportionate. Where there's not an injury, the punishment is proportionate. But there's like a lot of low-level crimes, disorderly conduct, vagrancy, that were put in place that haven't really led us to being safe. It's just led to more people being incarcerated.
Yeah.
Those are just a few of the things we're doing on sort of the criminal justice reform and police reform here in Virginia.
Okay. And I know that Angela Rye, she's one that speaks on all political aspects of, CNN contributor and such. She had mentioned that not only are those advisory boards necessary, but just to address the fundamental flaws of the police and just the overall. And I think that ties into a speaking engagement that you had a few years back, where you went into this amazing speech, really going back into the origin of where this whole government started, and then just relating it to, at that point was 2018. And you said, unfortunately, it's still relevant now. And now here we are 2 years later, and it's still relevant as we talk about, the aspects or those issues that we are still having to deal with. So that conversation, guys, is on my Instagram, and it's also you can find Jennifer McClellan on YouTube, and she is speaking about women rights and voting and how we all got to this point, and just what this government was built on. And I think that with that kind of ideology, it just has stayed and just kind of transferred. And, that government has applied to the police force the same kind of aggressive takeover that you mentioned when they brought over a few just to kind of hear or tend to the area in which they were building and developing at that time. So I think that it's just unfortunate. I mean, this is kind of things that I was not really, like you say, when we were in school, we didn't learn these things. We heard it as we were an adult. So I was just kind of, wow.
And that's, in some ways probably intentional. And for those that, just not to give the whole speech, but if you think back to how this country was founded, Jamestown was a business venture by, white English settlers. And the first, Virginia, we had the first representative democracy that was those guys. Then the first recorded Africans came as to serve them, and then the first women were recruited to serve. Power was sort of built that way.
Right.
Then we came up with the idea of sort of all men are created equal, building a government by, of, and for the people. But when it was built, it was only for a few people. And our history has been the struggle of how do we make that true for everybody?
Sure.
And it's been a long process, but because of white supremacy and Jim Crow, and those in power telling their stories and not necessarily the whole story. I see all the time, inequity was baked into the system. And if you don't know that and understand that, like exactly know the history of how that happened, then you unintentionally maintain it or make it worse.
I think we're learning that now.
Yeah. And I think as horrible as COVID is, as horrible as the quarantines have been, it has forced everybody to sit at home. I almost say it's like God put us all in a timeout so that we could like sit and really see what's happening, and then we can't get away from it. We got to sit with that and work through that.
Yes.
And have conversations we should have been having for the past 150 years, but we haven't, and now we have to because we're forced to. So everything's got a silver lining, and I think that was the silver lining of all of that.
And now opening this up, it's time to have a conversation and address it. And with that being said, we've had just this disheartening situation with Houston, Texas, as you probably did see yesterday, where the eviction rate was just, kind of soaring in regards to now that we're back out of semi-quarantine. Some of the states are opening up with really, I think, just no plan. I said that from the beginning. What is the plan? Open up everything, and then now these people have to suffer. And I know that you can speak to Virginia in regards to where we are, so that'll be great. But just as an overall or an overview for all the states that may have this concern, is it best for them to reach out to state legislation as well to be able to address?
Yeah, so I think there's sort of two sides of the coin. You can't have a rent moratorium and not also recognize that landowners have mortgages they've got to pay. So you also need to address sort of the mortgage side. And the federal government has done an eviction moratorium and a mortgage moratorium for federally backed loans. And so if you want and federal housing properties. And so you got to reach out to Congress to tell them you want them to continue that and providing some sort of relief to make sure that gets paid at some point. But
and that's the federal backed is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
That's right. So that's only those federally backed. It's
right.
This that have to deal with everything else.
Yes, those are the smaller.
That's right. And evictions are done in state court. So if you are concerned about eviction moratoriums, you need your state legislatures to address that. And so it's really important that you're speaking at the, well, in a lot of places, the actual courts are are local. So you really need to be calling your local, state, and federal representatives to say, we don't want anybody evicted and put out on the street in the middle of a pandemic. You know, we recognize that at some point those mortgages either need to be forgiven or paid, that back rent either needs to be forgiven or paid. Here in Virginia, we're trying to do an extended payment plan so that when that rent is due, it's not due all at once. It's like spread out so that somebody can actually pay it.
And breathe a minute.
Yeah. So, but it needs to be addressed at all three levels of government. And so that's why it's important that you make your voice heard at all three levels of government.
And the importance of voting on November 3rd. And
Yeah.
most of those offices will be up for election on November 3rd, which brings us to congratulations to you, as you will be, we're going to claim that you're going to be stepping into your new position real soon. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Jennifer McClellan is running for governor, and we are very excited for her to be doing so. So we are going to look forward to you and saying that you have a new position at some
Thank you.
point.
Thank you. Yeah. And that's next November. But I have announced now and I'm running now. But this November, make sure you go out and vote for president. Have a third of the Senate, Congress. A lot of you have local elections, maybe state elections. This one's existential. Frankly, I'm not sure. I mean, I think the future of our democracy is at stake. And
that's a huge statement.
Yeah. I really believe it.
Statement.
And then next year, then those of you who live in Virginia can vote for me, and I'd love to represent you as governor in 2021.
Yes, we are. We're like you said, we're wanting to get to this point so that we know, not to say that it's smooth sailing thereafter, but at least we probably reassess most situations, most issues that we have that are kind of on the forefront right now, and holding those responsible for getting that back in alignment, because right now everything is just in disarray, and it's so disheartening. It's scary, the unrest of just what's next, what will we turn on and find out tomorrow. So we can't stress even more: vote, register to vote, let people know if you need assistance getting to the polls. Now, we were talking just briefly as we got started in regards to some of the other topics that will be weighing heavy on November 3rd. And just, could you share with us some that you would suggest to really pay attention to?
So I think, we're going to have to rebuild our economy, our economic and healthcare safety nets. So, they're broken. We weren't prepared for COVID, and there are a lot of reasons for that. But we've got to rebuild in a way. Well, and frankly, we've had application like the Trump administration has just failed at every point in managing the crisis, and so that we're going to need to rebuild in a way that addresses the crisis, but also addresses that inequity, that makes sure that our essential workers who are out on the front lines risking their lives to keep us safe, whether it's the grocery store clerks, the nurses and doctors, domestic workers, healthcare workers, that they have what they need to be safe, but also we're paying them a livable wage.
Absolutely.
That they have access to healthcare. And all of our systems have been impacted in ways that may not be going back to where we were in March, but we can sort of rebuild better, rebuild in a way that addresses that inequity, rebuild in a way that recognizes, like, we need childcare because working parents need to know that their children are cared for while they work. We need an education system that recognizes like the achievement gap begins with early childhood education, who gets it and who doesn't. That we need to figure out how to reduce the cost of college and higher education. We need to recognize that technology is changing how we do everything. And you know, we're all sitting here on a Zoom and using our devices more and more, and they've become like a lifeline. And yet, not everybody has access to broadband or Wi-Fi.
Correct.
And so we've got to rebuild in a way that addresses those inequities, but also prepares us for the next crisis. Because there will be one, maybe not in our lifetime. But I keep thinking, you know, my dad's been on my mind a lot. My parents were older. I was the oops baby. And they lived through the Depression, and they lived through the New Deal, and the whole point of Social Security and later Medicaid and Medicare and those programs were to say, look, we recognize that sometimes markets fail, and you through no fault of your own are just trying to get by, and you need a safety net so that when that crisis comes, you don't fall to the bottom and you can get back up on your feet. That was the whole point of those programs. And over time, they've been allowed to erode. And I would say in the last administration, intentionally eroded. We're feeling that pain now.
Yes, because it was even so difficult for, those folks that needed to get, unemployment, for them to even pull out 401k,
Yes.
whatever it was, people could not access any of it. So we did not have the emergency button, the green go button to hit to say, okay, now this is what our action plan is going to be in the state of this emergency.
Right.
And, it's unfortunate because there was a gap, 3 or 4 weeks of time that people were just trying to figure it out. And most of us know that if you are one paycheck away, that's a long time.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
have to try to figure that out. And just like you say, whether it's in our lifetime or not, I mean, I strongly feel like it's going to come around again sooner than later. I mean, maybe in the next, well, I guess, we'll see how the pandemic is going. The numbers are still kind of moving around. So, and then, like you said, Labor Day is upon us. And if we don't do the right thing this weekend, we'll see another adjust in numbers. People, please wear your mask when you're moving around
Yeah.
this weekend.
Yeah.
It's just so necessary. But yeah, I mean, we'll see numbers change again. And then, we could potentially be back at this point. And it is a nervous situation when there isn't a plan in
Yeah.
place for what are we going to do. And then just like you were sharing, from the state aspect, you all aren't at liberty to print money. That's from Congress's, side. So it's not like when you hear the people on the local levels and state levels saying we need help and you want to just go and fix it, you can't do that. And it takes a little while to to put the policy in place and be able to get that kind of enforced. So hopefully
Well,
we
and here's the good news, and here's where everybody watching can help. You know, when you're rebuilding, um, you can do it in a way that meets your needs now and plans for the future, but you got to prioritize. And it is very important, going back to, we are a government by, of, and for the people. That means the what government does is only as good as the people who participate. That's who runs for office, who votes, but it's also who's calling their representative, who's showing up, or for these committee hearings, whether it's the local board of supervisors or Congress, making your voice heard. Because our government's much more diverse today than ever before, but it's still, here in Virginia, our state legislature doesn't reflect the full diversity of the Commonwealth. That's definitely true in Congress. So it's that much more important your voice gets heard. So I'll give you an example. When Congress was debating the CARES Act and trying to figure out how they were going to base aid, they based it on a head of household for a 2-parent family. There is one member of Congress who's a single mother, one, Katie Porter. And she said, hold up. If you have a head of household who is a single mother, this formula you have doesn't work. And they went, oh, we never thought of that before. Well, yeah, no, because you've never had a single mom in Congress. So, I saw that. I was the first member of the House of Delegates to be pregnant while in office in 2010. And I brought a perspective of, wait a minute, time out. Like, we've got to make accommodations in workplaces for women who are pregnant and or who might be nursing. And they're like, wait, what? We got to do what? Because those perspectives weren't ever heard before. So that's why it is so important, not just that you vote, but that your voice is heard when policymakers are shaping policy. All these people who are talking about, we got to open up the economy, But if you didn't have working parents and working mothers in particular in the room saying, hey, how are we going to open the economy if we don't have childcare? How are people going to go back to work if they don't have anywhere to send their kids and school is closed? Oh, what? Yeah. So that's why it's so important that your voice is heard, not just on election day, but all year round.
Yes, and even to continue with that, I mean, when we were talking about opening, it was the concerns of, okay, but even if people go back to work tomorrow, they don't get a check tomorrow. So you still have to give them, a running start. You got to give them time to be able to pay the bills. As soon as we opened, the bill collectors were calling people, and and it was just like, people, there was not a plan for that. And then it just stresses people out. And, different places you would go, you would hear those that wouldn't return back to work because it was, advantageous for them to stay home at the time and receive the unemployment. Obviously, wouldn't have to worry about the child care and that, as opposed to having to go back to work and stress over all the other things that were happening. But then all of a sudden that came to a halt. And then there was no unemployment. So, a lot of people now are without jobs because their employers said, if you don't return back in a certain amount of time, you don't have a job. So,
yeah.
It was kind of like.
Or they don't have a job because when their employer said you need to come back, they were like, well, yeah, but what am I going to do with my kids?
Right.
What am I going to do with my sick family member? Because, we don't have paid family medical leave that applies to everybody. You've got care workers who we trust to care for our sick and shut-in family members who don't have medical leave to care for their own.
Right.
So that's what's at stake at this election. I mean, look at candidates and say, do you have a plan for that? Because we have to have back to work plans that center workers. As we're going into Labor Day, if we are not centering workers and their safety and their well-being, that's not a plan. So
that's not a plan. It's a bullet point. It was not thought out. And I mean, that's a lot of where we are today. Everything has kind of just been, from a reaction perspective. Nothing has been proactive. And so, we're leaning into the next few months with the anticipation that, can we put a plan in place? Just a small plan, just, at least a 1-year plan, just so that we can kind of do a trial and error without, a hiccup and a hiccup and a hiccup, and then no one really addressing that. And I would love to ask you, I mean, as we're looking into the Biden-Harris election for November 3rd, what are you thinking? How do you think that this is going to play out in the first 100 days, assuming that they take office?
Yeah, I would, if you haven't, you should look at, they have what's called the Build Back Better plan that talks about every aspect of our economy and their plans for not just how do we get back to where we were in March, but how do we do it better? So domestic workers who are excluded from pretty much every worker protection you think of, whether it's minimum wage, unemployment, workers' comp, home care workers who are exempted from a lot of that, giving them the same safety nets that every other worker gets, because they're essential and our economy is built on their backs. It's let's put in they've got a plan for how do we not just expand access to childcare and early childhood education, but give the caregivers and teachers and the education workforce the tools they need to thrive at salaries that they can live on. They've got other plans on, how do we build a clean economy where we're focused more on energy that's from renewable sources that help the planet and not fossil fuels that are killing the planet. How do we expand technology and access to broadband? So there's a whole plan on their website that I think on day one they will I know on day one they will begin to implement. And I think part of it is just it'd be nice to have someone in office who understands that the role of government is to solve problems. Yes. Is to figure out, we have people who are hurting. Absolutely. How do we stop the hurt? Yes. How do we help people economically get back on their feet? How do we help make sure that not to nerd out on you, my friends always make fun of me. Like before COVID started, before COVID started, there were all these trends that were coming anyway. At some point, virtual school, all of the ways technology has changed the world. Those changes were probably 2 to 3 years out. Well, they're here now. As we're trying to figure out virtual school, as we're trying to figure out working from home, as we're trying to figure out, how does Zoom change everything? We got to manage that transition because we don't have any time anymore, and they recognize that. And so just having somebody that recognizes this is a transformative time in our history as a people and as a country, they get that.
Yeah,
they get that
happening like in real time.
In real time, yes.
As we've always been a little bit behind, and now some of that is showing. But yeah, we definitely need those folks that pretty much understand the basic language is where we are with it. Just real people understanding real policy, real issues, those things that need to be heard and addressed immediately. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that so many things have kind of just been pushed to the side and ignored, and it's just kind of compounding at this point. And I must say, it gets a bit heavy, the sleepless nights, and it's only so much of binge watching of TV, or snacking, or I won't say, for the sake of having to use this clip for later, other things that you could typically do with a little wine and so on and so forth. But those kind of things are becoming a relief of stress, because there's so many things that you're wanting to have conversations about and wanting to help people. I mean, yesterday I was texting, anyone know anyone in Houston that's being evicted, let me know. Thank goodness no one had anyone right in their immediate families that had that issue. But I just couldn't imagine, if you're going through this right now, and storms just passed and people were just kind of getting their things back in order from it, and then you have someone knocking at your door, and you just don't know where that resource can come from in 15 minutes, and I'm sure the times that it was probably 4 o'clock, and what courts close at 4:30, 5 o'clock. So that's just at least give them a hotel for the night so they can figure it out to the next day. But it's just unfortunate. And to not have anyone on the upper level that is paying attention, I think that causes people to lose hope. And we're already fighting with depression and, anxiety and things of that. So, I mean, as it relates to mental health issues, do you all find yourself having to discuss that as a policy?
Yes. And so 2 points. It's related to criminal justice reform and police reform, because unfortunately, we have too often left it to the police to deal with what is really a mental health issue. So, here, you hear all the time, and here in Richmond, there was a young man, Marcus David Peters,
yes,
who was in the middle of a mental health breakdown, and a police officer was the only person on the scene, and that ended in Marcus's death when he charged the police officer. We need to have a mental health professional be the first one on the scene, or at least on the scene when someone's in a mental health crisis. We need to identify I could tell you so many cases of kids with autism or adults with autism who something happens that is a result of their disability that's misunderstood, and they end up arrested. There was a kid in Lynchburg, Virginia, who was autistic, who got sent to the principal's office, and he was upset and kicked a trash can on the way out, and he was charged with disorderly conduct. And then the same kid was at a water fountain, and a school resource officer came to grab him because he wasn't following some rule, and I forget what it was. And the kid is touch sensitive, and when he reacted and pushed away the police officer, he was charged with disorderly conduct and assault of a police officer, which is a felony.
Wow.
So that kind of stuff happens all the time. So we need to make sure we have trained mental health or disability professionals dealing with individuals who are in mental health crisis or who have disabilities. We also have to stop looking at mental health in a silo from the rest of our health. Mental health issues are healthcare issues, just like heart disease.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're huge.
We've got to, but that system is so hard to navigate. And we got to fix that. We got to make sure that it's covered by insurance in a way that's just, not more complicated than heart disease. And we got to destigmatize it. And that's not all on government. Like, that's also on us, our schools, our churches, our communities, our neighbors. We have got to understand that mental health is part of our overall health.
Yes. And making notes of it, like you stated. I mean, it's definitely from like a school perspective, because I do have a friend that's in that area of work. And when she makes notes, I mean, they have been removed. So that when that person moved on to the next location, they weren't aware of some of the things that had already been addressed or have been noted to pay attention to, so then it kind of gets swept under, and they have another breakout, another fallout, like you say, kick a trash can or whatever. And then they end up with charges when it was already noted that this child is displaying some behavioral issues, some situations that may need to be addressed. So, and that goes in alignment with what you were saying about being able to just protect our front line, right? I mean, we've got to be able to take care of those folks so there's more of them to be able to sit in on these sessions to address.
Yeah. And then I think, again, and this is not something just for government, but like, we've all got to like check in with ourselves and check in on each other.
Especially now, right?
Especially now. I've been watching, I stumbled across this show on Instagram TV called Black Folks, where it's an actor who has just conversations with different people just about let's just talk about what we're going through right now. And it talked about how triggering the George Floyd murder and everything that's happened since has been for many of us who compartmentalize our lives. And I found myself doing this. We've had a lot of issues around Confederate monuments here in Richmond, Virginia. And I live not too far from a gigantic statue of Robert E. Lee. And I never realized how much mental energy I spent ignoring that thing because it was so triggering. And until I was forced to really say, hey, wait a minute, this is messed up. and like take the time to really feel those emotions, but then more importantly, talk about it, and then talk to my white colleagues about like, what does allyship really mean? Is it just we're going to take monuments down and we're going to create a Juneteenth holiday, which that's good, but that's the beginning. It's also like, how do we stop police officers from killing us?
Yes.
How do we, like, it's got to be deeper. Like, how do we make sure our kids are being educated
Sure.
to reach their highest potential? How do we ensure that our kids are able to get a job? It's not just about the symbolic; it's about the systemic.
Yes.
And we've got to be having those conversations, and they're hard and they're uncomfortable,
Yes.
but we've got to have them.
Yes, absolutely. And the statues were, as you stated, I mean, a huge part. I mean, I'm developing in Petersburg, and Petersburg was the battleground for a lot of the war.
Yeah.
Appomattox Trail, I mean, right behind several of our properties, there is a plantation, and the conversation around the Appomattox Trail and what they discuss. I mean, so we all tap into it, and you walk into those properties and you hear stories. And yes, people like to have wine and cheese and talk about how they still hear the Confederate noises in the houses and that. But all in all, we do have to talk about things. And I think that we have been being, I don't want to say ignoring them. I don't want to say what you said in your speech, where there's a level of ignorance to a degree where we're just kind of, moving along in our day, and we just don't really address certain things. And of course, we have all types of colleagues, so we try to not address things that could be a little bit controversial just for the sake of, leaving them there. But as the COVID has happened and the things have been taking place with us at home right now and having these conversations, I'm happy that we're able to unpack this issues and be able to focus on some of these things. Just like you say, the Robert E. Lee that came down, that was huge in Richmond. I mean, a very, very prominent area of Richmond. And I know some folks were extremely excited and some were not happy at all as it related to what was there. Some of it, I think it was just because it was there. I don't know whether or not they had a tie into it or not, but they just were.
Well, it's a lot of people didn't really think about what it represented and when it was put up. And again, it goes back to the ignorance. So, and for those of you watching, like, we grew up together, and we were inundated with just Civil War history, but part of it, not
That's
all.
it. Right. That's it.
And then it was like, all right, you had the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln emancipated the slaves, Rosa Parks sat on a bus, Martin Luther King marched, and
Take a test.
like, that's it, take the test. What we didn't learn was about Reconstruction, other than dates, and how during Reconstruction, you had this amazing time where formerly enslaved people gained political, social, and economic power. I did not learn until I was a legislator that 22 Black men served in the Constitutional Convention that led to a constitution that got Virginia back in the Union. I did not learn until I was a legislator that over 100 Black men served in the legislature between 1870 and 1900. And then what changed was a constitution that disenfranchised Black people, that and white supremacy, like the old white supremacist power structure, came back into power. And then racial terror lynchings happened. And that's when those monuments were put up. And all of that was a message to those Black people who gained social, economic, and political power: stay in your place.
Yes.
This is our world. That's not taught in school. That's not talked about. And our history was this like roller coaster of, push, and then Blacks gain social, economic, political power, and there's a violent backlash that happened in the 50s and the 60s. And that's what we saw with the election of Barack Obama and then the backlash that led to the election of Donald Trump. We've seen this before.
We've seen it.
But the more people born after Jim Crow legally ended who don't learn that history, those stories are not passed down, they don't understand that the effects of Jim Crow and white supremacy didn't go away when the laws were passed. It's not like it was a magic wand and said, okay, like hundreds of years of inequity just vanishes.
Right.
You've got to intentionally unwind it. And 400 years of trauma is what those monuments stand for Black people.
Yeah.
But for a lot of, and I live in that neighborhood, for a lot of my neighbors, it's just a big statue of a guy on a horse. And then for some, it's the symbol of the lost cause and what the Confederacy stood for. Well, I don't want to celebrate what the Confederacy stood for.
Right, like the flag that was near King's Dominion. Like where
Right.
is that? Where do I don't want to look at that. What is that?
Exactly.
Or even in Petersburg, I didn't know that there was, when the slaves were set free, they built a little town within the town. I did not know
Island. Yeah.
that is there.
Yeah.
And yes, it's still there. Of course, we're looking to build, and I think it's a several $1,000,000 right now, which I was just like, whoa. But it's amazing to know all of that. And like you said, we grew up here. We didn't know any of that, or at least I didn't know. I mean, I wasn't privy to any of that information. We did our little trips to Williamsburg, but that was about it. And
And the crater. We knew about the crater.
what were we learning on the trips to Williamsburg? Just what
Right.
you shared.
Right.
So yes, I think that knowledge is power. And that's what I am so, so happy about at this point, is that, as you stated, with us having to kind of shift downward from COVID and allowing us to sit and recalibrate, restructure, have awesome conversations like this. I mean, you and I haven't had a conversation probably, well, we did see each other a year or so ago, but this just amazing conversations about things that matter, things that will change the lives of not just us, but our children. Your babies are smaller than mine, so that's still some time there in between that work has to be done. And we're all kind of joining hands, and it's not just Black, brown folks. It is, all of us, as I stopped your video and saying we all have to do the work. And I'm so, so, so thankful and happy that we're in this time where we can see some changes and we can see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. If we all vote, people, if we all vote, we can make some changes that will happen now, start with us, and then we can just keep working at it. And like you say, once that opportunity opens up for us to have better communication with legislators and lobbyists or whomever we need to talk to get policy passed, that we feel like we're making changes. Because for years before this, it was just kind of tap and go, just kind of watching to see what happens. And a lot of us were not aware or educated. I think this political thing is something that you really have to study every day, because it's ever changing. So yeah, I definitely appreciate you for this.
Well, thanks. And I'll leave you with, we are, human beings are very resilient.
Yeah.
And even in our darkest moments, we find strength. And we find the strength to say, what do we need to learn from this tough time that will help make us stronger the next time? And so, as dark as the past few months have been, I still have a tremendous amount of hope that if we come together and value each other's points of view, and just say, look, at the end of the day, we all pretty much want the same thing. We all want a good job, an opportunity for our kids to do better than we did, and to live in safe, healthy communities. So
not to be scared to go and get pulled over by the police, not to have to call them for something and you end up on the wrong side of the gun. It's just so many things that we're so like traumatized, as you said, from that we got to be able to get through. I mean, it's just unfortunate with that part.
but we can get through it if we don't give up. If we give up, we won't get through it. If
Yeah.
we stay focused and, take time for yourself and sort of self-care when you need to, but stay focused and put in the work, it will get better.
Yeah. Yeah.
It will.
We're going to keep on. We're going to keep tapping in and leaning into
Yeah.
you all, the good folks that are leading us, and we appreciate you so much. We know that you hear what we're saying, and it's just been just a lot on me. And so to be able to sit and have a conversation with you, it was just a blessing. And I thank you for the time that you had to carve out. I know I worried your assistant so much.
We're gonna make it happen. We're
And
gonna
even
make it
when
happen.
you answered me, I was just like, oh, great. Oh, thank you. So I do. Thank you so much, and love and blessings to your family. And thank you for joining Champagne and Conversations and sharing the light, the knowledge about what we need to do for our upcoming election on November 3rd. Everyone, please make sure that you vote. And before you leave us, give us your social media and how they can follow you if they need to have questions asked.
So my website is jennifermcclellan.com, and it'll tell you every way to follow or get in touch with me. But on Twitter and Instagram, I'm Jen with 2 N's, McClellan Jen McClellan VA
Yes.
with two N's. And then on Facebook, it's SEN Jennifer McClellan.
Okay. People, we have Senator Jennifer McClellan. She has joined us today on Champagne and Conversations to give us an enlightening way on things that we need to really address for November 3rd in this upcoming election. Please vote, please register, ask questions, stay present, stay woke. And we thank you so much. And we'll talk again for sure.
Absolutely. You take care in the meantime.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.